to Strong Proposal Writing with Laura Jansen. This is the third in Illinois Humanities series of virtual capacity building workshops for grantee partners. My name is Tess Landon. I'm a consultant working with the grants team at Illinois Humanities. And I just want to welcome you all here today. Welcome my Illinois Humanities colleagues who are here and all of our grantee partners. Please do note as we're getting started that today's session is being recorded. So if you haven't given permission for that, just make sure to do that. And then also lovely seeing all of you who are on video, and just wanted to note that to make sure to mute your microphone if you haven't already, just so that we can focus on our speaker today. So to get us started, I'm going to pass it over to Mark Hallett, Director of Grants Programs at Illinois Humanities.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Tess, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Sure. Okay, beautiful. Hey, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces. My name is Mark Hallett, and as Tess said, I'm Director of Grants Programs here at Illinois Humanities. I think you all are already familiar with Illinois Humanities, but if not, we're the Illinois affiliate of the National Endowment of the Humanities, a 501c3 nonprofit, and we were founded in 1974. So the goal for today is being in partnership with one another and building community. Today's program, as Tess said, is the third in a series of 4 capacity building programs that we're putting on this year. And they are collectively meant to help strengthen the nonprofit cultural sector across the state. So we did want to open today's program with what is called a Land Acknowledgement. At Illinois Humanities, we respectfully acknowledge that the land on which our main office is located is made up of the territories and lands of the people of Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Odawa nations, as well as many other tribes who have called this land home, including the Miami, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee nations. These nations were forcefully removed from their traditional territories. However, these lands continue to carry the stories, resilience, and tenacity of these nations. Despite the federal and local government enforced policies of genocide against Native Americans, Chicago is home today to the 3rd largest urban Indian population, representing more than 100 different tribal nations. We also recognize that land acknowledgement statements are most meaningful when coupled with actual commitment to programs and actions that support Indigenous rights and cultural equity. We acknowledge that Illinois Humanities is just starting out on this journey and that we have a lot more work to do. So I'm going to turn things back to Tess and to begin what promises to be a very exciting program. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mark, for that. And yeah, once more, thank you all again so much for being here today. It's fun seeing everyone in the chat, and what a great group that we have here to learn with today. I know I'm very excited as someone who's spent many years grant seeking from the nonprofit space. I'm excited for all that Laura is going to share with us today and what we're going to learn together. So yeah, as Mark mentioned, these sessions are really about sharing resources, but also about building community amongst Illinois Humanities grantee partners. So it's really exciting that the topics that we're talking about during these sessions were identified by all of you, and that these are things that everyone's interested in learning and talking about. We will be using our chat today to provide some responses to questions that Laura will be prompting, as well as to share some information with you and for you to ask questions along the way. So we are going to drop into the chat our community norms for chat conversation. Some of these will apply today. Some of them are just sort of something that we like to share as we go into conversation together. So our norms are, just to quickly read through them, to create space for multiple truths and to celebrate and embrace different perspectives, to give and receive feedback respectfully, to acknowledge the difference between intention and impact. Things that we say may have a negative impact on others, regardless of what our intent may have been. And finally, to acknowledge that people are at different places in their understanding and learning. And so let's all just be open and generous to people who are learning new things and maybe making some mistakes along the way, as we all have. So please do use the chat to share questions throughout the presentation. We'll take a couple of points to stop and get to your questions, and then we'll have some time at the end of the program to get to any questions that may have come up along the way or that we may have missed. We'll also be taking a short break at a certain point during the program. And at that point, I'll just mention now that we're going to be sharing a survey about the program. We'll share that at a couple of points, and we'd love to have your feedback on this session and on the sessions that we're hosting in general. So without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to today's presenter, Laura Jansen, who is currently a program officer at the Pierce Family Foundation, as well as a grant-making advisor to the Coure Foundation. She has more than 25 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, including 19 years as a grant writer. So a ton of experience and insights to share with us. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Tess. Thank you, Illinois Humanities, and thank you all of you for being here today to talk about grant writing. Just a little bit more background. I have deep respect and love for what all of you are doing in the state of Illinois to bring humanities, arts, culture, history, literature to this people of Illinois. I was born in Bloomington Normal. We moved to where I took anything the Park District had that was a class in art or writing or anything, I took it. My parents took me to free kids concerts at the local, whatever Bloomington Normal symphony or band was. We moved to Livingston County, Dwight, when I was 10, and a lot of cultural humanities programming at the local library there. Both of my sides of my family are from Illinois, and my grandmother was a volunteer at the LaSalle County Historical Society in Utica. So I, like I said, have a strong love and background in the work that you all are doing. So thank you so much for doing that work, and I'm so happy to be here. All right, I learned a new thing on presenting on PowerPoint for this, so just for today. So give me just a minute here to get this going. Which one is this presenter view? There we go. Okay, we good. Tess, is this everything good and accurate here?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. So this is the third of 3 workshops, and I know those links are online, and I will ask Tess or Jen to make sure those links are in the chat. I did watch both presentations. I wanted to make sure that what I was telling you was building on what you've already seen. Strengthening your nonprofit capacity was first, and I felt that one in particular had some, in relation to our discussion today, had some really excellent advice on how to approach government grants. We're not specifically discussing government grants today, but both Juana and Tracy gave really good advice on how to think of your organizations holistically, particularly in terms of government grants. You know, the Department of Commerce, what business are you bringing to your community? The USDA, if you're a more rural agency, you would be surprised at what they will fund. So do watch that if you haven't. And also the idea of applying as a partner, not a lead. Government grants, federal in particular, can be kind of terrifying. So it's okay to apply, like I said, as a partner there. And then the statewide funders panel. I want to point out that Mark Hallett from Illinois Humanities gave some really good responses on how to express qualitative impact, which as humanities and cultural organizations is usually something you're really thinking about, and we're going to talk about that more later. But I want to point that out. And now that you've heard from some of those statewide funders, let's help you write the best proposal. So drop in the chat, tell us what about proposal writing causes you the most stress. What part do you find the most difficult? Is it understanding what the funder is really saying in their guidelines? Is it talking to program officers? You don't know what to say when you pick up the phone. Is it taking that beautiful proposal you wrote and having to fit it into 2,000 characters in an online form? Is it writing about a budget deficit or other things that you feel are certain to get you declined, or is it something else? So take a couple seconds and drop in the chat, like I said, that biggest bane of your existence when it comes to proposal writing, and Tess will read us some of those answers.
Character count. Definitely something we talked about recently. Building a compelling narrative around grant guidelines. The financial questions, our accountant didn't even understand some questions. Talking to program officers. When funding priorities aren't clear, that's the hardest thing I encounter, someone said. Another, understanding the guidelines, explaining potential impact, some of the odd requirements like a DUNS number, I guess, lots of complicated things, avoiding redundant answers when questions themselves seem redundant, being brief and yet getting the message across, finding out what their key soft spots are. Reworking our budget to fit into each form. It's the same numbers, but often they need it in different ways. Writing about impact, another character count. Deadlines. I need lots and lots of advance notice. I have a day job. This is my volunteer work. It's important, definitely. Making sure the grants writing matches what the museum's financial information says. Trying to fit the diversity questions when you're in a rural area. Looks good. Explaining budget deficits, explaining staff capacity, budget deficit explanations, measuring impact, not knowing what panel rubrics for scoring, evaluation questions, a lot of good stuff.
Thank you, Tess. Those, thankfully, we're going to be talking about most. We're definitely going to be talking about evaluation today. We're going to be talking about budget. We're going to be talking about the character count. That diversity in a rural area is a really good question. That is not something I'm specifically addressing, but we will at the Q&A. I made a note of that, so I will get back to that. And if there's anything else that you put in the chat that when we get to the Q&A, you don't feel I addressed, please do bring that back up. So let's go ahead and get started. And I think I know there was some weird red lines before. I think I got rid of those. Okay. So we're going to discuss a lot of things today. Some big ones. I am assuming you all have some level of experience with writing a proposal, even if it's just one or two. If that's not the case, if you're more of a beginner, if you will still learn a lot today, and there's going to be a lot of resources for you at the end of the presentation to learn more on some basics of proposal writing. This is a bit more not intermediate advanced, but like I said, stumbling blocks, common things that come up that that you need to learn after those basics. So today we're going to discuss some of those things. Are anticipating of funders' questions. A good proposal is going to make it so they don't actually have questions. You've answered them for you, and in order to do that, you need to sort of anticipate what the questions they might have. Not the specific ones they're asking, but the ones they're not asking, and we'll get to that. How to communicate bad news. Writing about tricky topics like evaluation, your strategic partnerships, capacity building, sustainability. Some common mistakes, and for that section, we have a lot of specific feedback from program officers that I've talked to, like what do they see most commonly in proposals that they need improvement on. Practicing good foundation stewardship after you've gotten the grant, then what do you do? And then some more resources. And I also want to acknowledge here that there is an inherent power imbalance between funders and nonprofits. And the sector favors people who have had fundraising training. They know how to write a narrative. They have inside info on what funders want to hear. It favors people who are connected. That's what we're here to help with. So I'm happy to do that. I've been doing this for a long time, so I hope I have some insight for you. A more equitable sector that is not so power imbalanced needs to be led by funders, and many funders are starting to do that. More trust-based philanthropy is a big movement in the funding world right now, but the nonprofits have a bit of a role to play too, and I'll talk about some ways where you can gently push back at some funder norms or expectations that are not equitable. So we'll talk about that a little bit too as it comes up. So the first thing is anticipating funders' questions. Is there something about your organization or the program that's going to cause a funder to want more information? If your proposal as it stands, they're going to have a question after they read it. Some examples of that might be a financial oddity, a new program direction. Maybe this has been a funder of yours for a long time, and suddenly you have a new program they've never heard of. Maybe you're changing your evaluation methods because you had a consultant come in the year before, and again, that's new to this funder. Those are the types of things that might, after a funder reads your proposal, that might come to mind that they would want more information on. And this is an example. All of these real world examples are proposals I've written, and I'll give you a second to read this, but a bit of background on this is a very small agency that had a very high administrative percentage in their budget. And words like overhead and administrative costs this is a myth that and a bad practice. And when funders demand a certain amount of overhead is important. It's administrative costs are important, and we'll talk about that later in the budget section. But this particular agency is very small, and like I said, theirs was particularly, their administrative percentage was like 55-60%. I knew the funders were going to have a question about that. I knew going in that a lot of them, if we're going to potentially reject our application because that administrative percentage was so high. So I addressed that in the financial questions, financial sections of the proposal by explaining how it got to be that way. There's only one full-time staff member. Half of their time is spent on administrative functions, that kind of thing, rent, workers' comp insurance, all of those things that cost money, that are really important, that are a little bit out of balance in a small organization. So I'll give you, if you may have been reading this as I was talking, but I'll just give you a couple more seconds to read that just as an example. And I am happy to report that this is a success. All of my examples are from also successful proposals. So this argument can be effective. So this is one example of anticipating their questions. I have put this in a financial section. When there's not room in those 2,000 characters per question applications, I've put this in the Excel spreadsheet when I upload the budget, the agency budget. So there's ways that you can fit in extra narrative when the 2,000 characters don't let you. And then another example is here. This was an event that was originally supposed to be in New Mexico, I think, and the funder knew that. And in between proposals, it got switched to Chicago. I knew they were going to want to know why. So we wrote again, I'll give you just a few seconds to read that. So these are, again, examples of the types of questions that you might anticipate the funder having as you're writing your proposal. And that's one thing that as you become more of an advanced grant writer, you'll start to get an instinct for those things and be able to answer them before they have a reason to decline your proposal because it's not there. And let's talk about for a second crafting a strong needs statement. And for cultural and artistic humanities organization, it's often not so much a need as an opportunity, right? what opportunity do the humanities and culture play in your community? So in a need statement, you want to know how you stand out. And this can be small or large. You might be the only arts agency in your neighborhood, or the only literature program in your entire city. It could also be small. Maybe you're the only one that's open on the weekends, so that people can access that on a weekend. It's how you are different. How do you stand out? What do you provide to the community that others do not? And you don't have to throw other agencies under the bus here. You are just trying to give a whole picture of the community and where you fit in on that and why it's important. Use statistics or data when possible. And there's a lot of places you can get. Census.gov is a good resource. Local surveys, if you have a local community foundation, has often done a community needs survey already, and you can use that. Obviously, newspaper articles and other things like that. And I want to encourage you to also think about asset-based statements rather than deficit framing. There's nothing wrong with pointing out real needs. If there's a literacy problem in your schools that you're trying to help with an after-school literacy program, that's fine. But what are the assets to build on? What is the town? What do the people in your community? What assets do they have that your program can help them build on? I was at the Grantmakers for Effective Organizations conference 2 weeks ago now, I think. And somebody said something, and this is for funders, but we're really good at rewarding people who describe their communities in the worst possible ways. So that was Dorian Burton from the Southern Reconstruction Fund. I want to give him credit for that quote, because it's important, like I said, from a funder perspective, to stop thinking that way. But this is one of those ways in which nonprofits can push at that narrative that, these communities are destitute and terrible and they need your help. This is a way you can push back and say, here's the assets in our community. Here's what we need in order to build on those assets. So just start thinking about, like I said, what, if you're trying a new program, did the new program you started the first time 20 people came and you barely had any advertisement for it, and you could get 100 people if you were able to put out some social media and had the money to hire somebody to do that, like that kind of, like, what kind of assets, what kind of interest is already there. And end your need statement sort of as a transition to, I think of it as a transition sentence to the rest of your proposal. How is your organization addressing this need or opportunity? And I specifically picked a more cultural or humanities example for this need statement. This is an organization that encourages family volunteering. So I'll give you a couple seconds to read that one. So this is an opportunity, right? They are presenting an opportunity that their community can get, their families in their communities get more involved in civic engagement. And I want to take a brief pause here with these two first sections, anticipating funders' questions and need statements. Is there any questions that you want? You can put a question in the chat here and I can address it now if you have something with these statements or with these sections. If not, if you think of something later, you can always ask it at the end. But if anybody has questions, okay, we'll move on. Next, I'd like to talk about evaluation. Evaluation can be hard, particularly for a grant writer in a small agency. There are times where I have, as a proposal writer, I felt like I've been writing the evaluation questions rather than the program staff. Oops, we do have questions. Data. I will make sure there's some data sources. Yes, as I know, like I said, census.gov is a good one as far as the demographics in your community. Yes, addressing who your competition is in your community. And I would think, again, don't think of it so much as competition as what do you all bring to the community? How are you puzzle pieces that all fit together to a strong community? Is it okay to canvass neighborhoods and use that as a percentage? Yes, I would say, we've surveyed our neighborhood and this is what they've said we need, what they need. Absolutely. That is an excellent way to do that if you have the resources and there aren't any. Chicago has a vast arts and culture community. It can be hard to stand out. I live in Chicago now and I've written for arts and culture for a long time. But again, you're a puzzle piece. Where do you fit in? Do you offer one theater I wrote for? They were really the only theater their size who offered services for people who were blind or hard of hearing or low vision. They offered descriptive audio description and touch tour. That they were the only one their size doing that. That I don't know that they specifically got any proposals for that reason, right? Any grants for that reason, but it was something we always mentioned in the proposal. This is one way in which we stand out. So there's something in the great tapestry of Chicago arts and culture. How do you fit in? How are you the puzzle piece that fits in there? And I'm happy to talk to you, Andrea, about that after. I will give an opportunity for people to reach out to me for specific questions, really specific to their agency after this webinar is over. And if you want to reach out to me, you can do that. So there will be contact information for you guys to do that. All right, so evaluation can be tricky. And this is one that I like to think funders have gotten better at. When I first started grant writing 20 years ago, it was all logic models, right? And these really painful charts, and that would take hours to fill out, at least, if not days, by the time I talked to program officers. And I find now most funders, and again, not all, but most funders are better about asking, what does success look like for you, rather than here's our logic model, fill it out. So they're getting better. But in order to make evaluation a little less scary, evaluation and learning are the same thing. So what is your agency learning about its work and how? And the other thing that's really important is you are evaluating programs for you, for your agency, not for your funder. You're going to tell your funder about it because they're going to want to know. But you should be asking questions that are important to you, to your programs, to your board of directors as they, help make decisions. So what do you believe and how do you measure that? And I worked for an arts organization a long time, and then I hadn't worked there for a while, and I ran into a board member and I said, how's it going? He said, it's really great. We stopped trying to jam our square peg into the funders' round holes. And we just said, this is what we believe, and this is how we measure that. And that they were doing better in their fundraising from foundations when they stopped trying to, like I said, fit their square peg into a round hole. Know the answer to those questions. And you can work with any format a funder gives you. What do you believe and how do you measure that? And a couple of examples. The first is from a LGBT youth group, and they believed that isolation, that feeling of social isolation, is one of the biggest challenges for LGBTQ young people, and they believed that their programs helped decrease that sense of social isolation. And so they would survey, where's your sense of social isolation now? Has it improved? And they found even attending one session, it improved, right? But that's what they believed, and that's how they measured it. Back to my family volunteer group, they had incorporated a new registration system. Their families were having a lot of frustration with their old system. So some of them stopped volunteering because the registration system was cumbersome. And so they surveyed family. They believed that they would stop losing families if they improved the registration system. And so in fact, they did. They were able to survey that and find that that was useful. So those are some examples, and those are not, huge world-changing outcomes, but they were important to these agencies, and that's how they measured them. And it's okay to only have 1 to 3 data points for any one program. You do not have to measure 10 things for every program you're doing. If you need to internally, if that's what you want to do, that's fine, but you don't have to from a funding perspective. It's okay to only have 1 to 3, I promise. Funders really want to know you're thinking about it, is the question. Of course, they're interested in the results at the end, but they want to know you're thinking about it. And 1 to 3 thoughtful data points is better than 10 throwing spaghetti at the wall. Okay, partnerships. Particularly in arts and culture, you guys often have a lot of partners. If you're doing community outreach work, you might have a guest speaker to go along with your regular programming, for example. So how do we talk about them? So you want to list who your partners are, what each of them will do, what your history is with each of them, and how you chose them. And that sounds like a lot, particularly if you have 2,000 characters to work with. But let's see how that works out in a real life scenario. So this is a theater company that was doing a particularly large production. They were working with the following organizations in this project. They were working with another ensemble who had specific experience in specific performance techniques that current staff did not have. So they were working with the young actors on that. We worked with them previously in 2007. That speaks to both how long the relationship goes, and it's a bit why you chose them. You worked successfully with them before, you're choosing them again. And here's another example. 2 different community organizations are providing speakers for post-show discussion panels. We've developed these relationships over the past year. And then another agency is helping develop community outreach events. It's a new relationship, but they came recommended by another partner. So these are the very simple ways that you can show. Again, this just showing a lot of what you're talking about in a proposal is the funder wants to know that you've thought these things through. So this shows that you've thought through your partnerships, and that they're not just that they're well planned and well thought out. So that's what you're looking at with the partnerships. And Tess, there's somebody who's been in the waiting room for a minute, but it's only a phone number, so I don't want to admit them. So I don't know.
Sorry.
Or Jen, it's okay. I just don't want to. It doesn't have a name attached, so I'm always worried about Zoom bombing or whatever. Okay. And Cindy, Cindy Waddick, I do see your question there, and come back to me in the Q&A with that on the needs statement, okay? Okay, so any questions on evaluation or partnerships before we move on to the next couple of topics? All right, can you say a little bit more about how you think about the what do you believe question? I'm thinking of it along the lines of what do you believe will work or what do you believe will help solve the problem? That's a good way to think. Yes, that is a little bit more what I need. Like if I'm going to use our historical society example in evaluation. We believe the community will become more engaged in the history of the town if we do outreach events at the library or whatever and then how do you prove that? Are you proving that there's more engagement with numbers of people returning? Maybe you don't maybe you don't serve, maybe you're serving more people, or maybe you're serving the same number, but they're coming back. And that's an okay thing to evaluate too. When you think about scale, it doesn't necessarily have to be bigger. It can be more service units, as it were, more touches. It can be depth. It doesn't have to be breadth. We believe people will care more about this historical building if we educate them, and we're going to educate them about the importance of this building by doing X, Y, Z. So like I said, what does your programming, what does success look like? Is it saving this historical structure? Is it having more people in the town care about the history of the town? Is it more people participating in a literature program? Ultimately, that's another way to think about it, is what does success look like for you? And how are you going to get there? Does that help, Harriet? Right. Okay. Again, remember, you're really doing this evaluation internally. This is for you to make sure your programs are working the way you want them to, or they're not. You're like, oh, this didn't work. Let's figure out why and try a different thing to get to our end. You're sharing all that with your funder, but first and foremost, that evaluation needs to be for you. Anybody else? Okay, all right, I'm going to move on to one of my favorites. We have a budget deficit and other bad news. This one can be scary, but 3 things really all you need to know. Tell the truth. Don't try and pretend you don't have a budget deficit, or your board chair didn't abscond with funds. That was a real thing that happened a long time ago for an agency I knew. I did not write for them at the time, but I knew them pretty well. Don't pretend that things didn't happen. So tell the truth, be honest. 2, be professional. Really try not to throw, even the board chair that absconded with funds. You don't need to, you could just state the facts. We discovered the board chair embezzled. There's no reason to name call or anything else. Be professional, even if it's really bad. And then how did you or how will you fix the problem? And this is the one that's the most important when you're talking about budget deficit or other bad news. Because again, funders, you're going to hear me say this a lot, funders want to know you have a plan. So if you have a common common problem is a standing deficit, not a 1-year deficit, but perhaps, you've had a deficit for the past 3 years. You have a standing long-running deficit. That's something, also goes back to anticipating your funders' questions, because even if they don't ask that in the application, they're going to want to know. So always address that. How did you or how will you fix the problem? Funders want to know you have a plan, that you have thought about this, that you are a thoughtful agency who is working through any issues that it has in a deliberate, careful way. So I am going to let you read this one. I'm going to give you a few seconds. This is back. This example is old. It's from the recession in 2008, but it still stands. I'm going to give you a little bit here, give you 10 seconds or so to read this one. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. The finances back then were bad, right? They didn't look good. Their individual donations are terrible. They had a budget shortfall. So first of all is acknowledging that we had this decline. We're not going to wait until you look at the audit or the year-end financials and discover it yourself. We're going to be upfront. We have this decline, and to address it, this is what we've already done. We cut these expenses for this year. And I admitted that list for space here, and it's not really important. You would have your own list, right? And then so then what else is happening? The board we're not cutting programs. The worst case scenario, presenting the worst case scenario, which should live in all paid positions and run as all volunteer agency. And then the board has considered other scenarios. So I'm showing the board and the agency has thought through this, right? Like what happens if we cut the executive director to 2/3 or 3/4? No intention of taking on debt to get through this. This is what our cash reserve is. We've used it already. And then to plan for the coming year, they put together 3 different versions of the budget. They were, to take account into, like, there were some proposals out. Would those come in? Then budget A would come through. If they didn't come in, we'd have to do budget B, for example. And we'll know which budget is moving forward by November. So this really clearly lays out the thought process of the agency and how they went through a very, very difficult year and all the different things they thought about. And again, happy to report they did not have to cut the executive director position. So that ended up okay. And they are still in business. So yay. Capacity building is my next topic. And we're going to do 3, this one and another topic, and then we'll take a brief break for you all to get up and get some more water or coffee or whatever you're drinking this afternoon. But capacity building, it's a much bigger topic now in funder circles. Finally, funders are coming around to understanding that capacity building is important. So what is it? How do you make your case, and who do you ask? Capacity building is any sort of non-programming expense that makes your not non-direct programming expense that makes your agency stronger. It could be new computers. It could be a strategic planning process. It could be rebranding, marketing, new logo, new taglines. It could be new staff. You need to hire a finance director. You're big enough now. You actually can't really just have your board treasurer do your financial statements anymore. Anything that builds the infrastructure of your agency is capacity building. And yes, sometimes this is program. Maybe you need a new software to track your participants in your programs. Generally, capacity building is thought about as everything like non-program that makes those programs possible. How do you make your case? Again, ultimately, this comes back to your programs are going to be more successful if you have a finance person tracking your expenses. For example, if you have new computers, your program staff are going to spend less time fixing their computers or waiting for the computer to reboot because it crashed again, and more time for programming. And that's how you make the case. Connect those dots for the funders. Say, like, we've had these computers for a decade. They crash 3 times a day. Our program officer, our program staff will have more time to run programs and be more effective if we get new computers. Connect those dots, as simple as they may seem to you. The funder doesn't always see it. Who do you ask? First, you ask your current funders, because they already like you, in theory, right? They already like you, they're funding you. They want you to succeed, one assumes. So ask them for either an extra grant this year. Here's our request for our $10,000 regular general operating grant. We're also asking for $5,000 in addition for this capacity building project. And I always phrase, because capacity building is much more of a buzzword in the funding community, I think that's how you should phrase, this is a capacity building project. Let it have it sort of be this is a time limited, we're spending this money on these things to build our capacity in the next year. Or you could also just ask for, you could ask for, like I said, an increase in your current grant. Or if it's during a whole separate time of the year, if you're halfway before your renewal request is due, then reach out to the program office and say, we have these capacity building needs. Would you consider an extra grant mid-year? But that's your first go-to, is your current funders. Then it's a matter of prospect research after that to see if there's anybody new out there. But for your current funders, and this would include individual donors as well. There are a lot of individual donors, particularly those who are perhaps a little bit savvier, who understand the need for your, like I said, to have better computers or to have strategic planning. Some of your individual donors might be a good ask there as well, but always with capacity building, go to people who know you first. And I will give you a couple seconds to read this example. Okay, so this very quickly states the need, turning away this many people. We could grow if we had the capacity. We do not at the moment. And here's why. We only have one staff. We only, part-time. This was the Family Volunteer Agency, and this was very early in their existence. And like I said, this is the problem. This is what we need. And then that is the focus of our capacity building efforts, which includes the following goals. Again, I omitted the list, but it was things like increase the executive director salary and time to full-time in the next year. It was hire a part-time program manager this year. So it listed the staff that they needed to hire in order to meet the demand, and that capacity, like in order to build their capacity to meet those demands. I think there was about 5 different things they were doing, increasing adult volunteers who could run projects on a regular basis, but those were the goals to meet this need. Again, this was successfully funded. So I want to address Antoinette did an excellent question in the chat. For most of us, the pandemic played a major role in our financials, especially if all revenue generating programs were suspended. Does stating that grow old? I would say no. Particularly in where are you now, right? You might say, and you can even acknowledge, like many agencies, 2021 or 2020 and 2021 were difficult. We stayed in business because of PPP loan or similar, and then say, looking forward, you're doing this. This is how we are coming out of that period. Are you able to start some of your revenue generating programs again? Did you have any particular individual donors maybe who really stepped up? Did you do extra fundraising? I don't think it gets old, particularly in talking about it. Where are you going now? Now that most of the government funding has ended, although some of it is still out there and finally trickling down. And like I said, where are you going now? Are you able to start doing your revenue generation? How long do you think it will be? Do you anticipate it will be before those revenue generating programs return to pre-pandemic levels, if ever? If you're an arts organization, you might say, we think it's going to be at least another season before people are really comfortable being in the theater and we get back to our regular ticket sales, historical ticket sales. Does that help, Antoinette? Does that answer your question? Okay, so related to that question, to be honest, a little bit more about budget, talking about sustainability. This is a question as a grant writer I always sort of hated, I'll be honest. How is this program going to be sustainable? Well, I'm going to continue to write grants to you. That's high. So this is a question I don't love as a grant writer, and I never ask actually as a program officer for that reason. But again, this is funders want to know you have a plan. So tell the funder what they want to know while still being realistic. Go beyond, we're going to apply for more grants. They know that. So I'm going to go right to the real world example here because it illustrates what I mean here. So this is a really small agency. This was the same one that I used the example for 2008 recession. So this is how I usually address that question. When we look at income streams where we've seen improvement in the last year, United Way. So we got our United Way first grant. We got our first local government grant. We've started getting monthly donations. So what are you doing? It's not just, what else are you doing besides writing grants? Maybe you just hired a new grant writer. Maybe there's one of you who's on the call right now. You're the agency's first grant writer. That's a sustainability answer, right? We're going to keep our program sustainable because we now have the money to finally hire a grant writer who can keep submitting proposals. In the past, our executive director was doing it, or we had a volunteer. I know there was somebody on here who was a volunteer. Someday that position might be paid, whether it's you or somebody else. That's a sustainability. We're finally paying our grant writer. Therefore, they're going to be able to have time to have more, to submit more grant proposals. But like I said, what else are you doing? Not just grant writing. Have you started doing crowdfunding on Facebook or GoFundMe, or GoFundMe is not really good for nonprofits, but you said, are you doing any of those peer-to-peer? Did you participate in Giving Tuesday for the first time last year? Those are the types of details that the funder wants to know. What else are you doing? Not, the sustainability question isn't, someday we'll have enough stock options that we won't have to ask for grants anymore, because that's not going to happen. So, but what else are you doing besides writing this grant proposal to help your agency get a stronger foundation of funding? And then also, what are you going to try and do in the future? Like I said, in this one, they've always, like I said, we had a goal of trying to get one of the local United Ways, and we finally got one of those. Then we were like, well, we really need more local corporate support, which is a common thing to say, but that was next on our list, right? And also really dial up the major gifts program. So those were, like I said, what have you done in the past to try and keep your organization sustainable, and what are you going to do in the future? Again, funders want to know you've thought about this. So showing a thoughtful answer to this beyond writing more grant proposals is really what they're looking for. Again, are you starting an earned revenue program or anything else? Question, is sustainability more than just money? For example, sustaining a program can be about having the appropriate number of program coordinators to make sure the program is being organized appropriately, or making sure there are actual recurring attendees. Yes, you can also answer that question from a, how do you keep it sustainable from it? Yes, absolutely. That's an excellent question, and actually answered your own question. You can absolutely answer the sustainability question by saying, we're going to keep this program sustainable by making the staff full-time next year instead of part-time, because it's grown enough that it needs to do that. And we fortunately have the money to do that because of, local government grant or something like that. But yes, you can absolutely can and should talk about it in a staffing or others, where this program is going to be sustainable because we just opened our new facility and now we have a home for all of our programs, and we used to be scattered throughout the city and no one knew where to find us. That's a way to answer it too. Thank you, Alondra. That was a good question. All right. Okay, the 2,000 character dilemma. This is one of my favorites. Okay, so more and more applications are online. So you have fields that usually have limits to the characters. Here's some tips. Antoinette, I'll get to your question here after this slide. Some tips for those 2,000 character dilemmas. Use phrases instead of full titles. If you have a program that's the Junior Literacy Fellowship Program, you could say that the first time, and then after that, just call it Fellowship Program, right? Acronyms when possible, although that gets a little tricky because acronyms can get to overload, and that's later. We'll talk about that later in the presentation. But acronyms when possible, again, maybe only every now and then you have to put the full phrase in there again to remind the reader what that acronym stands for. Eliminate adverbs. I'm telling you, in proposals, you don't need them. Go through your proposal and find any word that ends in ly, and you can almost always delete it. Any word that ends in ly. Adverbs are almost not needed, particularly in like I said, when you're looking to eliminate things for 2,000 characters. Same with ing words. Go through and look at every word that ends in ing. You can almost always delete the ing. And a lot of this is just kind of more muscular writing. This one, I know a lot of people aren't going to like, but single space after punctuation instead of double space. So period, single space, new sentence. The double space is from the days of typewriters. and it was more readable for the eye. With computers and word processors now, most all the style manuals, I used to be a proofreader, so I know all the style. I had a lot of experience with style manuals, but all the style manuals now call for a single space after sentences instead of a double, and this is a brilliant way to get rid of extra characters. If you have to, numerals instead of spelled out numbers, I hate how that looks. That's just a personal thing. I have a few things that I just, as a writer, don't like, but sometimes you just need the space that gives you. Eliminate the Oxford comma if you have to. Again, I'm a big Oxford comma proponent, so I take this one last. If I absolutely have to, if I'm literally like 3 characters over, I will eliminate the Oxford comma. Use the ampersand instead of and if you have to. And then finally, on your word processor, if you click on the paragraph symbol, which I've shown there, it shows you all of your formatting. And you can find extra spaces that you didn't know were there. That's really common in lists, in a bulleted list. A lot of times you'll have like 3 extra spaces at the end of a particular item on the list, and you can delete those and get a lot. I've found a lot of extra spaces that way. So, all right. And we're going to pause after this slide, but I do want to, if you have any questions for, these last few things we talked about, and I am going to read Antoinette's and answer that. So Antoinette says, my youth development organization had an aging board prior to the pandemic, and many of my older board members decided to move from being board members to donors only. It so happens that they were the board members that had the connections to our ongoing foundation support. Can you recommend how I sustain these relationships as well as the funding loss to other grantors? Yes, I would, first of all, if you haven't yet, go to that board member, those board members who have those connections, ask them for their help in transitioning you to being the primary point person. Say, can you set up a call with me and the program officer at XYZ Foundation? I'd like to get to know them on my own, but it would be great if you can introduce, if you can be at that first meeting with me to help smooth the way. I would ask that board member to do any help they are willing to do to help you, like I said, establish that relationship on your own. And if they're not, for whatever reason, I would go to the program officer myself and say, Joe's leaving the board. He was our primary contact to you. I'd like to talk to you myself to talk about how we can keep our funding relationship going, even though, Joe's still a supporter, he's just not on the board anymore. Can we have a conversation to talk about this? Always call a program officer if you have a question, stuff like that. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about foundation stewardship, but always call the program officer. But I would ask the board member first to help you. And yes, I would also explain that to your other funders. You could say, so-and-so left the board, that foundation's not funding us now because of that. Although we are attempting to rekindle that relationship so it is less board dependent, and that we can have that relationship on our own without a board member. I would be honest about that when talking to other funders as well. Absolutely, your funders should know when you've lost funding from somebody else, for whatever reason. Sometimes the guidelines change. That happens all the time, right? Like you have a funder for 10 years and all of a sudden they're like, sorry, we're not doing humanities anymore. We're only doing whatever. So yes, you should know that. They should know that you've lost $20,000 in funding for the last year, whatever the reason is. Because it's usually a reason that has nothing to do with you. It's they've changed their guidelines, or you had to cycle off for 2 years, or it's almost always something that's nothing to do with you. So you should tell other funders that so they know what your need is. Let's see. Open OperaWorks said in a Word document, you can do a search for the paragraph symbol followed by 2 spaces and replace the paragraph symbol by 1 space. Yes, you can. The find and replace is a great tool for that. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to take a break. I know I talk fast and I apologize. I'm trying to slow down. But please if I'm talking too fast, we do have Q&A at the end. So it is 2:03. I would like to start up again at 2:10. So.
And while we're on our break, we're going to drop our survey link again into the chat. Feel free to open that up now or take it. Love to know who's here and how this is going for you so far. We will see you back here at 2:10, and feel free to keep dropping questions.
Has answered Vanessa's question, but I will repeat. Vanessa was wondering if we'd be sending the slides. I'm sending a version of the slides while I have my, these organizations' permission to use their proposals as an example during a webinar. I don't have that permission to pass it out for people to have in perpetuity. So the slides will not include the real world examples, but it will include everything else we've been talking about. And I fleshed some of them out a little bit for that reason. So yes, you'll be getting that. This is a really great question that Sheila has asked. How are you able to increase the grant amount requested, which allows you to increase your program activities when funders often award a certain percentage of your actual budget? This is bad grant making, and I know that you can't do anything about that. This is, more progressive funders and trust-based funders are getting away from that, because the fact of the matter that philosophy of grant making perpetuates inequity, because it keeps the small agencies small and lets the big ones get bigger. And most of the small agencies, particularly in Chicago and the suburbs, those are the ones that are led by Black or Latinx or LGBT people. So it's bad grant making, Sheila, and we all know it, right? So what you can do, I know you can't do anything about the bad grant making. What you can do is try and have work on building your budget in other ways. So individual donations. Go back to the first webinar that Illinois Humanities and like I said, I think we'll put those. I think Jen will put the link to those previous webinars on YouTube into the chat. If you did not read the one about your funding capacity, they have a lot of really good ideas on how to fundraise in that. That was a really good webinar. But individual donors, try and get, even if you manage to raise $5,000 from local businesses, maybe, or if you can raise your budget in other ways, then those foundations, if they are limiting their grant to a certain percentage, they'll come along, one hopes. And I'd also work on the foundations who don't have that as a policy. And if you don't know, again, I'd reach out to your program officer. I would say, how do you, hi, thanks so much for being, for supporting us for the last 5 years. Can we talk for 15 minutes about, can I call you so we can talk about how grant amounts are decided, right? And ask them and for the ones that say, no, we don't base on a particular percentage, then ask them for more next year. So that's my answer to that question. Talk to your program officers about how they make those decisions. And if they don't say we base on a percentage, ask them for more. Okay, let's dive into common proposal writing mistakes. So for this section, I did talk to a lot of my friends and colleagues in the foundation space. What mistakes do they see? So you'll see some quotes here. And these are the most common: not reading the guidelines, not communicating with your program officer, lack of proofreading, mistakes in the project budget, using too much jargon, not being specific in your description, and avoiding a funder's questions. So let's dive into that. All right, our first one is not reading the guidelines. So even longtime funders might tweak their guidelines slightly. These were some very real world examples that happened to me very recently. What used to be, because I'm like, oh, this is good, it's 4-page narrative, fine. And then I go to submit it and they had changed it to 3 pages. I was like, oops. So I had to go back and cut out a bunch of stuff. They used to accept Word or Excel, and now you had to convert everything to PDFs. Not a big deal, but it was still something that I had forgot. I didn't do until I reread the guidelines. a foundation recently was like, oh, we used to only ask for an audit, but we want the 990 now too. So these are the examples. If I had not reread those guidelines, I would have submitted all the wrong stuff. Thankfully, I caught all of these things before I submitted things that were wrong. And some foundations are, you know, hopefully the foundation I work for, if you had done that, I would have called you and be like, hey, you forgot your 990, no big deal, but send it to me. You know, there are some funders who aren't as good grant makers, and they might be like, sorry, you didn't submit it, you don't get a grant this year. Again, that's bad grant making, but you got to try and hedge against that. Right. Reading and following guidelines is a must, but not always done. So I would recommend, before, you know, you all have your own timelines when you start working on a proposal. And if it's a new one, you're reading the guidelines because it's brand new, but we can get lazy on longtime funders. Even a longtime funder where you know that they're, you know, this is really just got to submit the proposal and you'll probably get the grant. At about a month in advance, reread those guidelines and then reread them again before you're ready to submit, just to make sure you didn't miss anything. Common mistake number 2, not communicating with the program officers. This is similar to the idea of anticipating their questions. If you know there's a problem, reach out to them, right? If you're having issues, questions, challenges around guidelines or required documents, reach out to your program officer sooner rather than later. I'd much rather have a complete packet a couple days late than an incomplete packet. Now, I will point out this is one foundation officer's opinion. A different foundation officer might say, I'd rather have everything you've got by the deadline, and if you don't have your audit till 2 weeks later, that's okay. But you're not going to know which is which unless you call them. So, and this is a perfect example is the audit, right? Your audit's required, but it's not done. And what are you going to do? You will get 2 different answers from 2 different program officers. So please contact them. You don't know which of them is going to say, that's fine, just wait until it's in and then send me your packet. And which one is going to say, I need the packet on the due date, even if it's last year's audit, and then you can send this year's audit in 2 weeks when it's ready. You don't know what they're going to say. Please contact them. You don't want to risk a grant because you're guessing what their requirements might be, because they have internal requirements with their trustees and their own processes. And if you don't know what they are, you're risking that grant. So please contact them. All right. Our next common mistake, send the wrong financials. So know your financials. And if you are relatively new or just don't really have a good background in finance, that's fine. Again, sometimes as a grant writer, feel like a finance person, even though I don't have a background in finance either. So if you don't, reach out to me after. If you need a quick tutorial on which financial documents are which and what they're important, what they show, if you're really newbie to financial documents, please bring that up to me in the Q&A, and we can schedule maybe a separate, we can talk it through then. Or we can schedule a separate 15 minutes. I'm happy to talk that through you. But really briefly, here's what they are. The statement of financial activity is also you can see this listed in several ways in an application. Statement of physical activity, or income expense statement, or profit and loss, or P&L. That is your income and your expenses. Very simple. What does your budget look like? A statement of financial position is also known as a balance sheet. That's kind of a snapshot of your financial health at any given time. And then a budget versus actual is just that. It was your budget as you went into the year and where you are actually right now. So send the right one. Often this is a common mistake. The right ones don't get sent. So make sure you're sending the right one. Again, if you're unsure, reach out to your program officer. Or a grant writing friend who has more experience with financials, and I might be like, oh, this is what they're asking for. So a few other tips. You'll get a lot of requests for a year-to-date financial report, right? Send us a year-to-date income expense, a year-to-date budget sheet. That can be the last quarter. It doesn't have to be last week. I know a lot of agencies don't only reconcile quarterly, particularly smaller ones. Larger ones, do it monthly, you're fine. But you do not have to ask your treasurer or your finance person, I needed year-to-date dated yesterday. You don't need to do that. Last quarter is fine. unless the foundation asks specifically otherwise. But the last quarter is fine. If you have something from, let's see, what's June, your last quarter would have been the end of March, that's fine, a year to date, I promise. Like I said, unless they very specifically ask differently. Double check what fiscal year they're asking for. I get that a lot. They'll send me last year's budget to actual and I want this year. So double check that. Again, if it's not in the guide, if you're not clear in the guidelines, that's a really quick question to a program officer that they're email that they're happy to answer. Hey, which you ask for budget versus actual, is that last fiscal year or this fiscal year? They will tell you. And then anything that's weird or different that is not a standard report, please give your finance team plenty of advance warning. Give them a month if you can do it. Sometimes a budget versus actual can take a while, depending on, you know, how QuickBooks is set up and how often you reconcile. So finance team would really appreciate news on that. Every now and then a foundation will ask for a cash flow projection, where you think you're going to be at the end of the year, for example, like not just budget versus actual, but where do you think you're going to meet your budget at the end of the year? That will take your finance team some time. So please, please give them some time. Also on finance, project and program budgets. I love, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. I will be honest with you. Okay, so your project budget should align with your project narrative, or you should have a narrative column. And we're going to talk, I have a great example on the next slide. But this proposal reviewer, the budget and the proposal need to work together, especially for project proposals, not general operating proposals. I often look at the budget first, and if the categories don't line up with what's in the proposal, it concerns me. I want to see a project was planned as a full entity with needs analyzed and a budget created in advance of the proposal. And then this last thing, this is why I like to talk about project budgets. Include administrative expenses in your project budget. So this is another, we talk about bad grant making, you know, refusing to fund. You will see refusing, we don't fund overhead. We don't fund administrative costs. You see that in guidelines all the time. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the last do's and don'ts section. Again, this is bad grant making, and funders, most funders are getting away from it. It doesn't mean you as an agency might not want to submit a project budget. And I know Mark Hallett of Illinois Humanities made a really important point about project grants in the funder panel webinar. So go watch that one too. He noted, you know, project grants sometimes are really important because maybe your agency as a whole does not fit the funder's guidelines, but this particular program does. So sometimes programs and project budget grants are important and necessary, but you still need to show the funder what it costs to have that program exist at all. And that's what the administrative expenses are. Even if in their guidelines, they very clearly say, we don't fund administrative expenses or we don't fund overhead. It should still be in the project budget. They need to know. And this is part, getting away from this idea is the funder's responsibilities, but this is where you as a nonprofit can push it a little bit. And it's, you know, it help them learn that this is a reality. And let's show you what I mean by that. And also what I mean by the narrative. Vanessa, I see your question there. There will be a way to sign up to talk to me, and we'll talk about that at the end. But yes, I'm happy to talk to you about that. So this is a project program budget. This is my family volunteer agency, and it was really easy to get. This was to Mark's point about sometimes your program fits the funder's guidelines, but your agency as a whole does not. They did a lot of family volunteer events, environmental things, you know, park cleanups, nature preserve, removing invasive plants from nature preserves, that kind of thing. So environmental funders would want to fund them, but they weren't going to give them a general operating grant. They only really wanted to fund those projects that were environmental in nature. So we created this program budget. And looking at this, and this is also, program budgets are a great way to get more characters in. If you have only 2,000 characters in your for the finance question, you can add a bunch of narrative here, right? Because if you get to upload your own spreadsheet, you can add this narrative column and get a whole bunch more information in there that you want the proposal reviewer to know. So just for example, so we've got this, these are not specific. These are kind of questions you would ask yourself as you're putting the program budget together. So for the income, I always I always show the funder I'm submitting to. I put them on a separate line item so they can see where their income fits in the greater scheme of this project. So this particular foundation, we were asking them for $10,000. And then next, who else is already committed to this particular project? And then you would list them over there in the narrative. If they were anonymous, if the funder wished to remain anonymous, then obviously put anonymous, but otherwise you can put their funder names there. And then from agency general funds, right? So these are your general operating grants, these are your individual donations, these may be agency sponsorships, earned revenue, that kind of thing. So the rest this program had $40,000 committed from foundations. The rest of it came from all the other various sources that the fundraising team had put together through the year. But let the funder see where their grant fits into that greater scheme. So then in expenses, so this is program personnel. So what are their title? You don't have to, again, unless the funder asks it. You don't have to list individual salaries. Like I said, sometimes they will ask, so pay attention to the guidelines. But if they don't, what are the titles? What this program personnel, is it the program manager? Is it, program assistant? Just what are the titles? And then the percentage of time spent on the program. Now, maybe this particular program staff, this is the only program they do, so it's 100% of their time. But maybe the program manager manages 3 different programs. So you would say 30% of the program manager's time is included in this budget. That's the type of narrative that we're talking about here. Intern stipends, how many? And then this is one that I would say, 2 interns, $1,250 per intern or something like that. Program supplies, again, this doesn't have to be a shopping list. But what are the supplies? In this case, environmental projects, it was gloves, it was small trowels, it was in some cases some wheelbarrows, like some bigger things. What is consumable versus equipment, which is more permanent? So like I said, for example, gloves I would consider consumable. Equipment would be the wheelbarrows. And sometimes if you have enough equipment, you can put that on a separate line item, right? Program equipment rather than program supplies. Because that is more permanent. Transportation, if you have a transportation line item, are those cabs for staff? Is it mileage reimbursement for staff? Just what do you mean there by transportation? You don't, again, have to say it's mileage reimbursement at 56 cents per mile. You just can say mileage reimbursement for staff. Curriculum development. In this case, this was a consultant to help write a new curriculum and printing of some things. Volunteer recruitment and training. This was some sort of outreach they were doing to recruit. What does that mean? This is a great example of narrative. What does volunteer recruitment and training mean? Put that in the narrative. Meals. Who are the meals for? Are they for the volunteers? Are they for the program participants? Are they for staff? Who are the meals for? Again, doesn't have to be a shopping list. And then here's my favorite part of a program budget: share of agency administrative costs. So for this program budget, I pulled out, I went to the overall agency budget. I pulled out all of the line items that were like purely administrative, right? Like the accountant, the fundraising staff, the rent for the office, the utility bills for the office, those kind of things that are purely administrative, the overhead that they all say they don't want to, that many people say they don't want to fund. And then I added all that up and I divided that by the number of projects that they had every year and said, okay, and it came out to, I don't remember what it came out to be, but then I multiplied that by how many environmental projects they were. And you can come up with this particular formula. You can have any number of formulas. And I've got some resources for you at the end to help you think about that. That's how we chose to do it. But if you have 3 main programs, maybe it's just a third. of your administrative costs to each program, right? This was very specific. We came up with an agency cost per event and then multiplied that by the number of environmental events there were. But you can come, there's a lot of, but that's what it is. Share of it, they need to know that. Funders need to know that lights need to be on, you know, rent needs to be paid in order for these programs to exist at all. Now, if you do have it, the guidelines are very specific that say we do not fund agency cost or, you know, administrative costs or overhead. You can put in the narrative, and I don't do that in this example, but you can put in this narrative column, we understand XYZ Family Foundation does not support overhead, and we will not use the grant in this area. Let them know you've read their guidelines, you understand, but you're also letting them know what it actually costs to run that program. I think this is a really important part of the project budget, and it's important for you because it does cost. You can't, you know, programs always cost more than the grant to run them. Even if you got a grant to start a new program, it's going to cost more than that grant gave you. So start thinking about it internally and communicating externally what those administrative costs are. Okay, going to duck early. Okay, Cindy, what if you don't have all the other funders committed but only applied to? That's fine. I would just call it that proposals pending as a line item. And then in the narrative, you might say, we expect to hear in May or whatever, you know, notification by June if we're getting this grant. Thank you, Andrea and Benta, for being here. You can finish watching the recording, I think. Does anybody else have questions on finances or program project budgets before we move on to the next? Okay. All right, it's common mistakes to, and I know that I talked about project and program budgets for a bit, but like I said, that is one of my soapboxes. So too much jargon. This is a real proposal and I love this organization, but I don't have any idea what this means. I will let you briefly read it for like 5 seconds. So I did reach out. This was a proposal that came in my work as a program officer, and I did reach out and I said, you know, I said, we're funding you. I'm concerned that other funder, you might be losing out on other grants because there's some difficulty with, you know, clarity of your programs. And I worked with them on that, and they have much better proposals now. And I do think they've gotten some more grants out of that. So describe what you actually do. And this is, you know, the program officer says, I can sometimes walk away from reading a full page of program description and not have any idea what an organization does because it's filled with so many buzzwords. So you'll be careful about jargon. And it's what, like the common wisdom is, you know, if your grandma can understand it, you're fine. So think about that. How would an outsider, and some things, obviously healthcare proposals, education proposals can be a bit more jargony because of the funders that are reading those. But in general, trying to avoid too much industry specific jargon. Common mistakes, too many acronyms. Acronym overload can happen pretty quickly. And this runs up against a 2,000 character dilemma. So try and at least every other question, if you are doing an online one that's, you know, 2,000 characters for every other question, try and spell stuff out. And you can, if you have several acronyms you're using, you can rotate them, right? Like question number 1, or, you know, question number 2, respell out the first thing, question number 3, spell out a different one, like, but keep reminding the program officer what those acronyms stand for, because it can get very flipping back and forth to the first page, you know, earlier pages to see what they're talking about. And I find myself doing that sometimes too. So as a proposal reader, having to go back to a first page and remember what an acronym is. So minimize that as best you can while still working with the character limits. Common mistakes, program descriptions that aren't specific. And this is very specific. This program likes to see our youth program meets X times per week after school for X minutes, serving X students over X months of the school year. Like that level of detail should be in your proposal somewhere. There's still, typical sessions are however much time. Their goals are this. So surprisingly, this kind of thing is often missing, and I have to hunt it down with extra calls, emails, etc. There's always usually room for impact stories and emotional appeal, but your first priority is to make sure your programs are clearly described. Next common mistake, not answering the funders' questions. I'm going to pause here for a second. Bronzeville Historical Society grants that ask for 990s have been a challenge. We have submitted for years the easy postcard. Should we begin submitting the short form for the 990? Yes, I would recommend that. If you have the internal capacity to do that, I would recommend that. There are some, you should always, don't assume that the easy postcard's not good enough. I mean, reach out to the program officer and say, we only have the easy postcard. They might say, well, that's okay. Can you, because they might say, well, submit that, but then also send us like 2 years of internal financial state, right? Like year end financial statements for the past 2 or 3 years. They might want more information in addition to that easy postcard. And then some will say no. But at least you've asked. And then you'll have to gather some other, but they don't assume just because it says 990 and you don't have the 990 that it's a no. Reach out to them first. And if you're getting a lot of, oh no, we can't unless you have a full 990, then yes, start doing the short form. Common mistakes, not answering the funders' questions. Ignoring specific things we ask for never feels accidental. It always comes off as a deliberate attempt to dodge the question. So always answer all the questions, even if your answer is short, awkward. And from a proposal writer perspective, I absolutely realize some questions seem really redundant. Right? Like they might say, what does success look like? And the next question are, what are your goals for the program? I have done that. I feel your pain. I have read more than one application in my life that has asked those things and they seem exactly the same. And my advice there is to take your regular answer and split it up. Right? Split it up into you don't necessarily need to repeat yourself, but just split up what your normal answer would be and take it and answer the 2 questions with it. But I do realize some of them are redundant, but you should still not answer the questions. And then this sort of like deliberate attempt to dodge the question goes back to what we talked about previously about you have bad news. Don't ignore the question just because you don't have a good answer for it, right? You be honest about your internal process. If there's a problem in that area, like one of the questions that I get that I dodge a lot for some agencies is, what public recognition is the foundation going to get for this grant? I don't like that question anyway. Again, I kind of feel it's bad grant making. I mean, I understand the whole, like, your logo will be in, that's fine. But some corporations in particular seem to want a lot of stuff. And I've had agencies that don't have the internal capacity to really do much, right? They're small, but don't not answer that question. Be honest, say, we put all of our funders' logos on our website. If that's all you do, that's all you do. But don't not answer the question. All right, you got the grant, now what? This is on foundation stewardship. So what is just right in foundation stewardship? Do you invite them to events? How often should you update them, etc.? The cardinal rule here is to follow their rules. Some foundations are pretty specific. Others are not. So here's what I recommend. You can invite them to events, but don't expect program officers to attend because they get invited to 5,000 events. Cindy, I'll get to your question in a second. they get invited to a lot of events. Don't be offended if they don't come. Don't assume that you're not going to get granted anymore because they don't come, but yes, certainly invite them. Updates, how often and how much. So if what I find, I have both as a proposal writer and on the other end as a foundation officer, I really prefer, rather than a form, if not otherwise indicated, rather than a formal report, I really, like here's quarterly reports to your funders. I really prefer a short email, just with 1 or 2 bits of information a few times throughout the year. I like to, just hi, I was at our program I was observing our program last night, and it's really up and running now. And I really thought of you because you guys helped us launch this program. Thanks so much. XYZ happened at it. I prefer that rather than a formal mid-year report. Or again, if the funder asks for a mid-year report, send it. If they don't create work for yourself. Do not send a report mid-year and create work for yourself if they don't ask for one. Like I said, just send them an update, a quick email a couple times a year. And I would just create a calendar for that, skipping to the last bullet point, have a plan on your, if you have a moves management software, if you have a donor software that allows you to put tasks in there, put them in there. For XYZ Foundation, I'm going to send a brief email update in May and October, because that's when the programs they fund are the programs they like their program officer just might really like a couple of your program. They might give you a general operating grant, but that they really like some of your programs personally, and those happen in May and October. Then that's when I would send those emails. If you don't have a moves management software, that's fine. Your calendar on your on your laptop or your computer or your phone will do the same thing. Any organization changes, you should absolutely tell your funders before they hear it on the street. They don't, if your ED is leaving, if your board chair, you're getting new board chair, anything significant that's happening with your organization, you want to reach out proactively so that they don't hear it from somebody else. And again, could just be an email. So I got a couple examples about this. So one is, this is a very specific email that I received from a grantee. Hi, hope you are well. I was in the computer lab yesterday. It was filled to capacity, and the rest of the week is reserved too. The lab has been such a great resource for our community, so thank you for your grant to support it. I look forward to seeing you around town soon. That is like I said, it's relatively easy for you as a grant writer to send that, or development director, whoever does those. And on the other end, as a program officer, I really appreciate hearing that than a more formal report. But the Pierce Family Foundation does its granting a little differently. We have long-term relationships with organizations, so formal reports aren't as big of a deal for us. But that's the type of email I'm saying. I'm not asking, don't turn this into a 3-paragraph, 4-paragraph email. Just it's a quick, I think, and a lot of the program officers I know appreciate that as well. Following their rules, these are very just specific. This is word for word from a grant letter. Please do not include trust staff or it's on any list for mass mailings and reports or mass emails or email blasts. So while generally you would put your program officer as a stewardship on your email list, this is very clear they do not want that. And this is a very particular foundation, and they will possibly not allow you to submit a proposal next year if you don't. So follow their rules is what I'm saying. And beyond that, create a personalized plan for every funder. I know it seems like a lot, but once you all have it set up in your calendar to remind you to send them emails, it's pretty easy. So before we go on to the other, Cindy asked, if a foundation says they aren't accepting apps without an invitation, is it okay to send a letter of intent anyway? So I want to take that in the Q&A, Cindy. I'm not forgetting. I wanted to read that out because it's a good question, and we'll do that in the Q&A because it's a bit of a longer answer. So thank you for that. It's on my, I have that on my notes for the Q&A. Does anybody have any questions about any of these sort of common mistakes that we've been talking about, or foundation stewardship? I'm moving into our last is a short little other do's and don'ts and resources. So before we get to this last little short section, does anybody have anything from these common mistakes that we've been talking about? Okay. So we're going to run through some quick do's and don'ts that don't really need their own slides. So they're all in. Don't be afraid to say no. You know, I know your board member sends you an email like, oh, look at this foundation that I found. It's okay to say, thank you for this. I've looked into them and we don't fit their guidelines. That's okay. Do prioritize your work. Don't be sucked in by a deadline for for a funder that's maybe a marginal fit, and ignore the foundation that's a really good fit because they don't have a deadline, right? They might have a rolling deadline and be like, oh, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. Prioritize who's the best fit over whose deadline is next. Don't complain when you don't get funded. Don't call a founder or email a program officer and complain. Do ask for feedback though for next time. You might not get an answer. But anytime you get declined, particularly if it's something you thought was a really good match, I would send an email or call and say, you know, thank you for reviewing our proposal. We appreciate the consideration. Would you mind, can you give me feedback on our proposal so I can improve for next time? They might say no, but nothing comes bad from asking. And it does help. I very specifically have been able to correct some things in a proposal and get funded the next time. So it is worth reaching out. That has been particularly true in state government grants, I found, because government grants they're really sometimes so very specific that getting that feedback can really help you address those needs the next time. Don't create a program just to get a grant. I mentioned this before, but the program's going to cost you more money than the grant. So don't create a program just to get a grant. It never works out. Do look at your current programs, though, to determine if you can describe them differently. For example, there was an opportunity that came our way for arts leadership fellows. And we're like, well, we don't really do that. But I was like, but then I realized that we did have young people in the company who, after, like, veteran members of the company who took on extra responsibilities after being in the company for a year or two. I was like, oh, we can set that. That actually fits this grant. We would never really describe them in that way before. We didn't think of them internally necessarily in that way before, but it was there. The program was there. They had to add like a small evaluation component in order to make it fit. But we did not create a new program. We just described the program we currently had in a slightly different way. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, ethically or morally. It's like I said, looking at what you already have and realizing, oh, this actually does fit. We just never really thought about it in that way before. Okay, so general operating grants are the holy grail, right? That's what you want, because you can use the money in any way that you see fit rather than it having to go to a certain program, although we have already discussed how program grants remain important. So how do you get more general operating funds? First of all, don't eliminate yourself from the general operating conversation. Don't assume the funder doesn't fund gen op unless they say they don't. I started working for an agency quite a while back where every program they said, oh, well, what program do we want to submit this proposal for? That was their internal conversation every time a new proposal came across their desk. Okay, what program should we ask for? And I started saying, well, they're not asking, this isn't a program specific funder. Why aren't you asking for gen op? And they had, by habit, and because funders for a long time refused to fund gen op, just by habit, they didn't even think about it. So don't eliminate yourself from the general operating questions. Always ask for unrestricted funding unless the guidelines say you can't. Do make a program ask as broad as possible, and then do disguise Gen Op as program specific as much as possible. These are pretty similar. So the first one, do make a program ask as broad as possible. I worked for a theater company, and the funder in question only funded theater education. They did not actually fund productions. So we essentially took everything that wasn't a production and put it into the theater education category, right? It wasn't a way that internally they had that the agency thought about its programs. They didn't silo their programs in that way, right? The education and the productions were all holistically part of the same whole. They did not silo them. For this funder, did we silo them? Yes. Did we describe just the education part of our programming and give them a budget that did not have production costs in it? Yep. And that's okay. Again, it's a way to look at your programs the way the funder sees them, even though you internally maybe don't describe them that way. And then similarly, do disguise Gen Op as program specific as much as possible. I'm going to go back to my family volunteering agency. They really only have one program, and that's family volunteering. They don't have a bunch of different programs. So and it's a relatively small agency, less than $500,000 budget. So when we would come across no Gen operating requests, it's got to be a program. I just took all the administrative costs out of the organizational budget and be like, and I called it, and then I would retitled the budget family volunteer programs, because that's true. Just put but that's essentially a Gen Op. I mean, if you can request a cost for all of your programs at once, that's as close as Gen Op as you're going to get. So again, these things are not like fudging. They're not in any way wrong ethically as you're applying. It's just a way of looking at your programs and how you're presenting them, particularly when you think about budgets, to funders that require certain things. All right. Don't use a couple things. Don't use exclamation marks unless it's a direct quote from like a participant or something. Absolutely use emotional elements like quotes or stories are appropriate. Exclamation marks come off as a little off-putting from the proposal reader's perspective. Like I said, if it's a direct quote from a program participant, that's fine. If it's a general narrative about your programs, I would recommend not. And then this is just something that came up. Diversity, equity, inclusion is important to talk about these days. And you absolutely, when the funder requests it, should report those statistics in aggregate only. For example, 60% of our staff identifies as a person of color. Don't identify individually without permission. I saw that in a attachment recently, and you just don't do that without permission from the individuals. So we're at our Q&A, and there's two things I want to go back to. One is the no unsolicited, and I know we only have 5 minutes. And so I apologize, but two quick things. One, there was a question earlier about diversity. If you're in a rural area or an area without, like, when you get to that question, the DEI, what are you doing for diversity, equity, inclusion? One, I'd look at your census numbers for your specific census tract, and then look, does your staff, does your programming, does your board, does it reflect that diversity? Even if it's an agency of 80% Caucasian and only 20% people of color, are you still engaging with that 20%? I would look at it that way. And you can also look at diversity in a socioeconomic, who's low income in your area, and talk about engaging those people, because with arts and culture in particular, a lot of it is mid to higher income people who go to the arts. So how are you engaging lower income people? That's a way you can talk about diversity if you're in an area that is mostly predominantly Caucasian. And I'm happy to talk with anybody about that separately. That's just a brief overview on how you can talk about that. Are you increasing your programming? Even if, are you is your historical programming focusing on people in the area in the past who've lived there in the past, who are of color? And it's a new focus area for you to bring up these stories to the local population. That's a way to talk about it as well. So there's a lot of ways you can talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. And again, I'm happy to talk personally about that. You will be getting a version of this. It will include a link to set up. I will give any of you on this call 15 minutes. So there'll be a Calendly link in that version of these slides to talk about this, to talk about something else that might take some time. Right now, I'm just putting it through like mid-July because I didn't want it to be endless, but certainly I can, like if something comes up in September and you're like, oh, I wonder what Laura would think about that. If she would give her opinion on this, I would do it then. I just set up the Calendly through July so that it wasn't endless. But I'm happy to talk specifically about that diversity question. If anybody has language that you want feedback on, here's how I'm approaching this difficult question. What do you think about it? That's how you can use your 15 minutes. Happy to help there. The other thing I want to talk about briefly is the no solicited application. So there's two ways to go about that. One, compare your trustee lists. Who's on your board? Who's on their board of trustees? Ask your board member if you know any of it. Ask your board, pass these around. Anybody recognize anybody here to start a conversation, to get an introduction. I also use LinkedIn for this. So-and-so knows so-and-so. So I might ask, hey, I see that you know XYZ. Would you be willing to do an introduction? And otherwise, then yes, and I wouldn't call, and I wouldn't necessarily prepare a full letter of inquiry blind. I might do an introductory email if there's an email available. If you do, keep it short, keep it to about a page. I know you, and acknowledge, I know you don't take unsolicited applications. They appreciate knowing that you actually read their website. I know you don't take unsolicited applications. I feel it'd be a good match. Here's why. Can we set up a time to talk? If like I said, 1 page or less, frankly. That's how I'd approach that, but I also try and find a connection. LinkedIn can be your friend there, and finding out who your trustees know can be your friend. Very quickly, I want to skip to these resources. The one that I want to point out, because you will get this in the Nonprofit Finance Fund has some webinars that are really great on how to understand financial statements. And I recommend that, particularly if you feel that finance is not your strong suit. There's a lot of really good information there. Oops, sorry, resources, there we go. And the Wallace Foundation Knowledge Center, they have some great templates for project budgets that can help you figure out how to calculate your administrative costs per program. They have you set up these little buckets and it's really, I really like some of the resources they have as well. I know we don't actually have time for Q&A, but because Humanities has a couple wrap up things. You will be getting a link to schedule time with me in the follow-up when you get these slides. So please use it if I didn't answer your question today. I'm happy to, I've been doing this a long time, so I feel I have lots of information that I'm happy to impart to people. Grant writing can seem really terrifying, and it's not. You just have to think creatively sometimes about how to approach a problem. So like I said, that will be in the follow-up. So please do use that link, and I will send it back to Tess then.
Thank you so much, Laura. So much amazing information. And just reiterating one last time that we will be sharing a version of the presentation, some of the resources that were linked, and some other things. So hopefully get most of those questions answered. I do want to wrap up with just a couple of important announcements and opportunities. I will take one last chance to plug our program survey. Really important for us to just, again, know who's here and know how these programs are meeting your needs and how successful they are. So please take just a minute to do that. And then I did want to announce a couple of upcoming things. So first is our next capacity building session, which is happening August 17th. That session is going to focus on the multiple ways that organizations are harnessing the efforts of volunteers with a few great speakers. We're posting in the chat a link to the capacity building series. Registration for that is going to be open very soon, so look out for that registration link. And then secondly, we have a few grant opportunities open right now, so you can take what you just learned and put it into practice right away. So one is that we have just released the grant information for the Foreground Rural Initiative, which is a new initiative at Illinois Humanities, and those have an August 1st deadline. And we're going to drop a link to all of our grant offerings and deadlines and application pages in the chat. The second one is that the September 15th deadline for community grants at Illinois Humanities is all dedicated in this round to general operating support. So this is an exciting new opportunity. And again, you can learn more about that opportunity and apply at the link that's being shared. And then third, our colleague Tyrese Williams is going to be announcing soon the 2022 statewide Envisioning Justice grant opportunities. So that's something we've been doing for a number of years and really excited to announce that opportunity this year. And then, yeah, one last thing before we go is that we did just send out the first edition of the Illinois Humanities Grantee Partner Connection newsletter. So this is a new newsletter that we're sending out to all of our grantee partners. It's a place for you to share information with one another about opportunities, resources, a space for us to share all of the upcoming grant deadlines and events at Illinois Humanities, and a place to, again, continue to build community amongst our grantee partners. So if for some reason you didn't receive that, please send an email. You can send an email to Mark, or you can send an email to communitygrants at ilhumanities.org. That's an email address that we'll use to collect info for that. And we'll also drop that email into the chat. So one last time, thank you, Laura, so much. Thank you all so much for your active participation, for your great questions. And we look forward to seeing your responses to the survey and seeing you at the next capacity building session in August. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.